Namaste, Suswagatam, and welcome to Words of Wisdom Gyan Ganga on our Virat Hindustan Sangam social media channels. Today is episode number 220 on Sunday, the last Sunday of the calendar year 2023. And we have another program, and the topic is Telecoms Act 2023 Modernizing Measures or Tool of Repression. And for the next 45 to 50 minutes, we will have Dr. Subramanian Swamy and Dr. Venkat Iyer discussing this topic, which is of a serious nature, especially in India. And I wish to introduce Dr. Venkat Iyer, who is our guest today. You are familiar with him. He has done the Legal Gyan Ganga program with Dr. Swamy in the past on Saturdays, and today he is as a guest on our program today. I'll give you a brief introduction of Dr. Venkat Iyer. Dr. Venkat Iyer is a barrister and academician based in Northern Ireland. He is attached to the School of Law at Ulster University, Northern Ireland, where he teaches media law, constitutional law, and business law. Dr. Iyer has been in legal practice since 1981 and is, amongst other things, he is a trained mediator. Dr. Iyer has lectured in several foreign universities, continues to be a visiting professor in several institutions. He has also acted as a consultant to several governments, private corporation, and non-governmental organization, namely Government of Kenya, Bhutan, and Vanuatu. In 2003, 2004, and again in 2012, he was invited by the Royal Government of Bhutan to advise on the draft media law for that kingdom. Dr. Iyer runs training courses on media laws and media ethics for newspapers and media organizations around the globe. Dr. Iyer has been engaged in designing and delivering capacity building programs for judges and magistrates in various jurisdictions and frequently runs judicial training programs. Dr. Iyer is the author of several books and articles and the editor of two journals, the Commonwealth Lawyer and the Round Table Commonwealth Journal of International Affairs, both published from London. We welcome Dr. Iyer to our program, and with this word, it is over to Dr. Swamy to initiate today's discussion on the Telecom Act 2023. Over to Dr. Swamy.
Thank you, Jagdish, and welcome to Dr. Venkat, who's a long, old-standing, he's young, but he's an old-standing friend of all of us. He was in Bombay for many years before he migrated to the universities in Ireland, and now he's become internationally well-known in the fields that he is specializing. One of them is, of course, in this question of the what we are seeing today is essentially the right of privacy. Some years ago, the Supreme Court had decided that given the Constitution of India, right to privacy is also a fundamental right. It was included as part of Article 21, and so today, anyone who takes away the right of privacy would be violating the fundamental rights, except that fundamental rights themselves are subject to reasonable restriction. Now, we want to know whether this particular thing of introducing Pegasus into at will the government and the government's free hand in listening to other people's telephone calls, for example, is in fact a reasonable restriction. Of course, I believe it's a very unreasonable restriction unless someone has proved to be a prima facie by the court. Just not the prima facie of any police institutions, but if the court has held there's a prima facie guilt, which requires the tapping of telephones, then only it can be done. Now, all that is being thrown to the winds in this new act which has come in, which has already been now It is completed. It's now a full-fledged act. It's been passed in both houses, and the President of India has signed on it, and so it's part of the law. And of course, we can challenge it and have it. And I am with my colleagues in law who are with me, who work with me, who do their law work with me. They with them like Satya Sabharwal and Kanodia and Parth and so many other people who are part of our legal team. And so we are preparing a challenge, and we hope to give you some of those things later on. But today is actually the field is for Dr. Venkat to speak as freely as long as he wants. Put it in very clear thing what it is all about and how it is extraordinary and how it is a violation of the fundamental rights, even considering the reasonable restrictions. So with that, I will say that I would particularly like Dr. Venkat to deal with this question of Article, I think it's Article 3, Section 3 of the Act, Section 3, which deals with the question of privacy. And it's a 3-7, clause 3-11, and he should deal with as freely as he wants. But I would like him to focus a bit also on 3-7. Over to you, Dr. Venkat.
Thank you, Swamy. I want to begin by making a few points in support of the new act. Now, astute listeners and watchers will have guessed that what will follow is not undiluted praise. So let's get the compliments out of the way early on. First of all, no one can deny that there is a need for modernization of the law in this area. The prior legislation in the form of the Indian Telegraph Act 1885 and the Indian Wireless Telegraphy Act 1933 had clearly outlived their purposes. In fact, they had the potential to invite ridicule because, among other things, telegraphy is a concept which has died throughout the world. In the UK, the telegram service was discontinued in 1982, while in India, the last telegram was accepted for delivery in 2013 after being available for some 160 odd years previously. By coincidence, I happened to be in India on the day before the service was discontinued. And to mark the occasion, I remember going to the Central Telegraph Office in Bombay and sending telegrams to a few friends. But of course, thanks to the inefficiency of the postal department, not all of those telegrams were delivered. But on a more serious note, I want to make the point that there's no way a law of that vintage can support the enormous advances in communication technologies that have taken place in recent decades. Therefore, there was a strong case for updating and modernizing the law. And to that extent, there cannot be any fundamental objection to the passing of the new legislation in this area. I would incidentally strongly disagree with the view that laws should be changed or repealed merely because they are colonial in origin. The test for reform should, in my view, be whether the law in question is fit for purpose or not. But that is a point about which not many people in India seem to be particularly concerned. It has become fashionable to use colonialism as an argument and a justification for all manner of actions, as if nothing further needs to be said to justify any change. A second point I want to make in favor of the new law is that it would be foolish and unacceptable for anyone to argue that the state should not have any power to intercept communications without the consent or knowledge of the parties involved. In a modern society, there are strong reasons why such a power is needed. An obvious example is to combat and prevent crime, including, of course, serious organized crime and terrorism. Another example would be to protect national security. The challenge, however, for democratic societies and societies that swear by the rule of law is to ensure that such a power is kept within reasonable bounds and that it is not misused or abused. How that is done, I may have something to say about a little later. A third point that needs to be made in favor of the new law is that it is not per se unreasonable for the state to possess the power to license the establishment and operation of telecommunication networks, or to require those offering telecom services to the public to seek governmental authorization, which the new law does. These fall within the normal regulatory powers of governments, including democratic governments. But these powers should not be allowed to be exercised arbitrarily and without sufficient safeguards against the abuse of those provisions. And therein lies a huge challenge. A case can also be made for the allocation and management by the state of the radio spectrum, which is needed for mobile communication. This is partly because the spectrum is limited and has to be used for various competing lawful purposes, and partly because, as a common resource, the state exchequer would be justified in generating revenue, which can then be used for the public good in much the same way that certain charges are levied for the use of other infrastructural facilities, for example, tolls on highways. Here again, there should be no room for arbitrariness, and the allocation should be done in a fair and transparent manner. What else can be said in favor of the new law? At a rather practical and mundane level, the Act has provisions for regulating rights of way for those intending to lay telecom infrastructure, for example, cables or cell towers, on both public and private property. This is also unexceptionable, and if it is done properly and fairly, it can avoid a lot of chaos and disputes. There is one other good thing, in my view, in the Act, and it has to do with requiring telecom service providers to seek and obtain prior consent from users of those services when they wish to send out promotional, that is, marketing and other optional messages. Coupled with this is the creation of what they call a do not disturb register, which is long overdue in India. I have to say, however, that I remain skeptical about the effectiveness of these provisions because, as I hope you'll agree, a major problem in India is that while there's no dearth of laws, there are serious deficiencies in the enforcement of those laws. And given the sclerotic state of the justice system, even if a conscientious administrator decides to take enforcement action, he will probably find it a frustrating exercise. So, having said all that can be said in favor of the Act, I will now turn to talk about what is worrying, even deeply worrying, about it. I'll try to be as moderate in my comments as possible while being conscious of the fact that many critics have expressed themselves very strongly both before its passage through Parliament and after. I cannot claim to offer an exhaustive critique, mainly because our time is limited, but I'll try to highlight some major issues of concern. For a start, the Act allows for a serious invasion of personal privacy, a point which has already been flagged by Swamy. That is both worrying and ironic because recent years have seen an increasing emphasis on the so-called right to privacy. I say so-called because, as I have pointed out in previous lectures, I'm not convinced that there is or should be a right to privacy, mainly because defining such a right in law is fraught with all kinds of challenges. I would argue that it is reasonable for everyone to have an expectation of privacy, which of course is context dependent, and that such an expectation should be protected and fulfilled by the legal system. The Indian courts have actually gone much further and tried to enshrine a right to privacy. Again, something that Swamy has already referred to, for example, in the Swamy case. And elements of this right seem to be recognized by the legislature as well. For example, in the data protection legislation that was passed last August. Against that background, the Telecoms Act is definitely regressive. For a start, it authorizes the interception of messages sent via telecom networks and their disclosure in what it calls intelligible format without making any exemptions for encrypted platforms through which many messages go in contemporary times. And this can be done according to the law on the occurrence of any public emergency or in the interests of public safety. This is deeply worrying because apart from the vagueness of the language used in the relevant provisions, one of the fundamental features of end-to-end encrypted platforms is that messages cannot be accessed by anyone other than the sender and the intended recipient, and this includes the service provider. By breaching this important security safeguard, not only is the privacy of individuals invaded, but there's a real risk that many of the providers of end-to-end encrypted services, such as WhatsApp, which has now become an ubiquitous tool of communication to over 2 billion people worldwide, will withdraw from the Indian market, denying hundreds of millions there a vital service. Furthermore, the Act allows the government to dictate to service providers what it calls standards and conformity assessment measures on encryption and data processing, which may weaken existing standards and privacy respecting innovations. This is not something to be lightly dismissed as simply technical and esoteric. There is also another worrying section under which the government can insist that telecom equipment and services can only be procured from trusted sources. What those trusted sources are is left vague, and also that the government can suspend telecom services from countries and persons notified by it, including on grounds of affecting friendly relations with foreign states, a dangerously vague phrase. Crucially, the Act confers on the government unreasonably wide surveillance and interception powers in relation to the contents of communications without judicial or other independent oversight. It is true that the Indian legal system is creaking under the weight of arrears to the point of collapse, but there are still some vigilant and independent magistrates and judges up and down the land who can be relied upon to check abuses. And to deny them the power to do so is, in my view, inexcusable. It is also my view that judicial oversight has the potential to ensure that such wide-ranging, some would say draconian powers are exercised with care and having due regard to the principles of necessity and proportionality on the one hand, and to the rules of fair play and natural justice on the other, even if those principles are not explicitly stated in the legislation itself. Another disquieting feature of the Act is that it entrenches the existing powers of the government to suspend telecom services without adequate safeguards. This has been seen by many analysts as particularly troublesome, given that internet shutdowns, sometimes for prolonged periods, are a frequent occurrence in India. Now, there are a number of other provisions which also can be critiqued or at least questioned, such as those for appointments of members and chairperson of the Telecoms Regulatory Authority, the exception made for allocation of spectrum through an administrative process, as they call it, and not through auctions in certain circumstances, the power to make rules on types of acceptable biometric-based identification for those wishing to use telecom services. And the fear here is that this may be a backdoor method of bringing in Aadhaar into such transactions. Also, prescription of severe penalties for certain offenses. For example, if someone obtains a SIM card using another person's identity documents, he can be jailed for up to 3 years and asked to pay a penalty of up to 50 lakh rupees, and so on and so forth. I don't have the time or the information to go into all those other provisions, nor have I must confess, read the Act exhaustively. But I know that concerns have been expressed by domestic commentators at length on these matters also. Quite clearly, there are also bigger and longer term issues which cannot be ignored. Chief among these, I would say, is the future of digital communication services in India and the healthy growth of the IT and telecom sectors. If it is perceived that regulation is becoming heavy-handed and unreasonable, both domestic and foreign players in this sector will think twice before investing in or expanding their operations in India. The ensuing laws will affect both the government and ordinary users of digital services, which cannot be to anybody's benefit. So, in conclusion, I would argue that, as I indicated at the beginning, that the Telecoms Act, while welcome in some respects, especially in terms of modernizing the law in this area, does raise many serious concerns which need to be addressed. It is unlikely that the government or parliament will revisit the law at this stage. So the only hope is that despite the absence of any explicit judicial safeguards in the Act, the courts will, when cases are brought before them in due course, engage in a close scrutiny of its provisions and interpret them consistently with the constitutional guarantees of due process, fundamental rights, and the rule of law. Who knows? They may even strike down some of the more problematic provisions, as the Supreme Court did in relation to the Information Technology Act not so long ago. And I'm happy to hear that Swamy himself is proposing to challenge the act in the Supreme Court. And I, for one, will be watching any action that he brings with a lot of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat, rather. You have posed the issues very succinctly. We are not too much concerned about updating or bringing to the modern level the acts which have been originally passed in the 19th century and early 20th century. It's not a. It should have been done a long time ago. But what we are concerned about is, say, for example, the Pegasus thing that we have got from the Israelis. If that is put there without notice, it is in fact a gross interference in the privacy of individuals. How is an individual supposed to know if Pegasus has been planted in your telephone communications? So that is one example I'm giving you, where it's not that the governments have a right to find out and so on. There is no place in which there is a way of knowing that you have been your telephone conversation is being taped without your knowledge. And so that's the issue on which we are concerned with. And consequently, the right to privacy, you may think it's not a fundamental right, but it's always been subject to reasonable restrictions. There's no fundamental right in our constitution or Supreme Court's judgments, which is now where the right is not subject to reasonable restrictions. So what I would say is that we should not give this blanket power to the government that they can plant a Pegasus in anybody's telephone. And it is for you to find out that it has been so done. I'll say that it should require the government to make out a case that there is a reasonable restriction, reasonableness of the restrictions. And then it should be allowed. Like this, there are some other aspects which I think our other colleagues will raise. I would like you to correspond that don't you think that it's extraordinary that you can plant the Pegasus, for example, without having to declare that you have planted it? You see, if supposing you told me, and even if as a criminal, I'll just say, what? I'll open a new telephone line, and by the time you discover that you have a new telephone line, you have done whatever you wanted to communicate. So what is it that they gain by putting this? And in fact, all that is going to happen is that the conversations of almost everybody is going to be recorded, and it will literally mean that we are a state like the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was, today Russia is, China. I think we are not. We won't be qualified to be called a democratic country if this is the kind of restriction placed on free speech.
Okay.
Yeah, can I respond?
Sure, go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There are many things there which are entirely relevant and appropriate. So first of all, part of what you are raising has to do with the right to know, which is nowadays considered to be also a fundamental right. And you can either look at it as a standalone right, or you can look at it as part of the right to freedom of expression, which also includes the freedom to receive information. And that, to some extent, to a limited extent, has already been enshrined in Indian law. Now, of course, the difficulty I have whenever I discuss Indian law is that the law is one thing, the practice is quite another. So don't hold me to actually effectively, making the case that because there is a law, that everything is working well. But let me just try to outline the main points. So there's a right to know. Now, obviously, the right to know law, which in India is called the Right to Information Act, has exemptions. And one of the big exemptions is national security. So if, for example, the government decided to plant something like Pegasus, they will obviously try to justify it by saying it has to do with national security. There's no way.
I have to stop you there.
Yeah.
You see, I agree with you that there are national security issues where you can't inform the person that, listen, you're a national security risk according to us, and we are going to tap your telephone. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they can always put in a sealed cover and give it to the Supreme Court or the High Court or whatever court you decide to nominate. Somebody must be there to be able to assess that you are making your judgment has merit in tapping the telephone of somebody. Just the government thinks that it should be done, and there should be no one else to know about it. So, what will happen is that they will do it in almost everybody, including your girlfriends, and and many of them do have girlfriends. And they can. There's no way of detecting it. All I'm saying is that, okay, you have the power to tap. But there must be some agency which is of judicial status, where it is told that this we are doing it, and because it is required, and these are the prima facie data we have, which requires it to be done. And the judiciary definitely would be as patriotic as anybody else in deciding that that something needs to be done and something that doesn't need to be done.
Yeah, I was about to
Sorry.
come to that. So, you're absolutely right. We do need, and there are actually agencies that do precisely that kind of work. So let me
Yeah.
give you the example of the UK. So
Hmm.
what we have here is a special committee of Parliament, which
Yeah.
has the power to question ministers on oath on these matters. And of course, it also has the power, for understandable reasons, something to do with what you just referred to as the sealed cover process. I'm personally completely against the sealed cover process, particularly in relation to the judiciary, but keep that one side. What the committee can do is to also sit in closed sessions, because obviously the operational side of national security matters cannot be disclosed legitimately in certain circumstances. Of course, the real difficulty is any government will try to hide behind the national security screen, even if they're doing
Yeah.
things which, strictly speaking, are not intended to protect national security or to further national security interests. But at least there will be parliamentary scrutiny. And of course, the difficulty in India is this. As you know, parliamentary scrutiny in India is not quite as strong as it should be. I'm being very careful. I'm using very mild language. I could use much stronger stuff. But you only have to look at what happened recently in the situation involving that lady who was expelled from Parliament. Now, this was done by a parliamentary committee with no due process at all. Now, I'm not talking about the merits or demerits of Mahua Mitra's case. I'm simply telling you, in principle, parliamentary committees have turned out to be so impotent and biased that I begin to wonder whether that will work. Now, there's another possible solution along the lines that you have in mind, and that is to actually have a tribunal which will go into these
Yes.
matters in closed session. That is also something we are used to in the UK. Intelligence and Security Tribunal or something like that can be devised, which will have the power, the authority to actually question the government
Yeah.
very intensely on these matters, at least to the extent of disclosure of whether something of concern has been done or not done, without revealing the details of how it is operationalized. And quite frankly, along with that, I would also add there is a need for a very clearly defined code on which the government should act, even in relation to matters that need to be kept secret. It is perfectly possible, for example, to use the principles of proportionality, the principle that no collateral damage is done. In other words, you're trying to find out, for example, about the activities of a smuggler. You cannot justify any invasion of the privacy of the smuggler's children or family
Yes.
members simply because you're
Yeah.
investigating him. So there are ways in which it can be done. But Swamy, the real problem is this: all these things work only if you have people of competence and integrity and also dedication. That is where I, unfortunately, have a lot of concerns. Now, it is possible that I'm being cynical. I'm willing to plead guilty to that. But I do think that processes and mechanisms only go up to a certain point. After that, the human factor kicks in. So that's roughly how I would deal with your question.
Dr. Swamy, quick thing,
Let,
because it's very similar to
let
what
others
Venkat
ask.
said. Yeah, very similar to what Venkat said. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay.
Yes.
The US has a court called the FISA court, Dr. Swamy. It's
Yes.
Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. It's very similar. It was set up after 9/11, exactly for the same reason that Dr. Swamy, what you're looking for threats, national security issues. you still don't have authority to go do warrantless wiretaps. That's exactly what this act is doing today. They have no authority. They can just say at whim. They're saying in public interest. What is the definition of public interest? There is nothing in this saying that what does it mean by public interest? What is a threat? There is no definition for these terms, and they just have broad powers. There's only one thing that I want to ask, Venkat. There's one provision, 51. It says, no suit, prosecution, or other legal proceeding shall lie against the central government, the state government, or any authority under this act, or any person acting on his behalf, as the case may be, for anything which is done in good faith, I don't know what that is, or intended to be done in pursuance of his act, or any rule, regulation, or order made thereunder. What more do you need? So you can't sue the government, even if if your privacy is violated. You know that they made a warrantless. So, like for example, what happened in Gujarat a while ago when somebody was chief minister, they made warrantless wiretaps on some women. You can just go wanton today. And Venkat, the problem today is it's just not the central government that has got the power. Now they are also giving this to the state governments. Every state government is going to have a rogues come going out and tapping people's phones, invading people's privacy. Whether they have as you said, they should have an expectation of privacy, whether they have it today or not. But this kind of a blanket, protection saying that you can't sue me is unheard of. I don't think there's any law in anywhere in the world. I don't think even maybe China, Russia, but I don't think that's not what India is. Having such a blanket protection saying that you can't sue the government or anybody, what does that mean? That the entire act has been given this protection, so they can actually throw in anything. And they've said also in the subsequent place, they said the central government may, by just a notification and subject to conditions of previous publication, make rules not inconsistent and provision of the act to carry out. So they can keep on amending stuff on this with absolutely, they don't have to go back to the parliament. They don't have to go to anybody. They can just write one line of a thing and say this is also part of the act, and publish it under some gazette under some obscure name, and no one would even notice it. These kind of blanket powers are absolutely unreasonable. I think the intent, as you say, the act is good, and India is pathetic at executing these acts, and they always, in most of the 90% of the cases, it's used for abuse. I just wanted to make a point saying that my objection to this act is it's absolutely grossly wrong. It is written right, but badly implemented by giving such kind of powers to the government. This is uncalled for. Without no judicial oversight, no parliamentary oversight, and the way shamefully they passed this act, when you kick out 140 MPs, did not even have a time for discussion. This is such an important act, and you're saying that you want to, modernize your act again. What we were having in archaic ones, I agree, but it needs to be debated. Whether the other person is intelligent or not, it doesn't matter. There is a process. There's a parliamentary process, and you go do this. Tomorrow, if BJP flips and Congress comes, what do you think they're going to do? At that point in time, they're going to use these laws against you. What are you going to cry? Who brought these laws? The problem with BJP idiots is they don't think long term. They only think today what Modi does. Modi is not going to live 10,000 years.
Easy on that. There are people in BJP who can think forward.
No, the basic idea, the concept is that we should look at our children, grandchildren, whatnot in the future. And these kind of laws are draconian. So I just wanted to make a point because, Dr. Swamy, this is my domain. I know what privacy is. I know what US has gone through. Even during the attacks of 9/11, the Congress did not allow the government to have unlimited power. They said, no, you can't do warrantless wiretaps. You have to go through a FISA court. But unfortunately, this parliament was not allowed to function. And if this had been brought to debate, probably somebody would have suggested, okay, fine, you can have these laws, but hey, set up a FISA court or something to that effect. You can't just go warrantless wiretaps, throw Pegasus on people's phones. This is scary.
Ramesh, can I respond just narrowly to the point that you raised at the start of your intervention? And that is to do with the clause which says no suit can be brought against the government, etc. It is not an unusual clause, but don't read it literally, because if you had a competent, functioning, non-corrupt judiciary, there is a lot of leeway even within that clause, in spite of it being so broadly worded, for a judge to say, we will not allow this to stand in the way of a civil action being brought against the government. Because do remember the phrase good faith. It sounds very simple, but it's potent with meaning in law. Good faith involves so many things, and it is very easy for a judge who is so minded to actually say what you have done is not in good faith, and therefore this clause does not apply. But you need judges of
Yeah. How
competence
many
and
of them do you
courage.
find in India
Which
today? Venkat?
sadly,
That's the point.
I can't see too many of in India.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point. I mean, the issue is
Yeah.
competent, knowledgeable, who is very strong in his virtues and values. How many judges do we have in India? That's the question today.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Swamy.
Sorry, Swamy, you wanted to say something?
No. But let's say others speak first.
Yeah, I want to say something in favor or as well as against. Now, in favor, of course, we required the law because the other laws were centuries old, 1993 or 1933, 1850, 85, and 1950 and all that. So new law was needed. Technology has progressed, and with technology, the communication has changed. Whole world of communication has changed, and therefore we needed new laws. Fine. Now, as far as the taping of the phone is concerned and the powers given to the central government or state government is concerned, even when the powers were not written, there were unwritten powers with the state government. Dr. Swamy would certainly know, and those who have a sense of history would also recall that in 1988, Chief Minister of Karnataka, Mr. Hegde, Ramkrishan Hegde, had had tapped the telephones of his party colleagues, his ministers, and I mean, I would not say everything.
And his girlfriends also.
I didn't want to say that. Dr. Swamy said that. Yes. Now, same thing happened. I mean, it has been going on.
All in good faith. All in good
People
faith.
have been challenging. People, all in good faith, and all in public interest. All in public interest. And even party colleagues, people who have been ministers in the cabinet. Now, same thing continued for years despite all these protests. And very recently, when Ashok Gehlot was the chief minister of Rajasthan, same thing was accused against Ashok Gehlot also. I mean, he was also tapping the telephone. So take from 1988 or to 2023. I mean, it's 35 years, same thing has been going on. And in between, you had this mega espionage called Pegasus. And we all know we devoted a complete discussion on this very forum on Pegasus. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi, whether he ordered it or who ordered it, who purchased this technology, we do not know yet, because there was no probe. And even when there were cases in the court also gave almost something like a clean sheet and said that the people who have been victimized, they should have cooperated and this and that and whatever, but it has gone under the carpet. And so therefore the law was needed, and nothing new would change. Even when the law was not written and law was not there, then also these things are going on. And even now the things are going on. And then when the new Telecommunication Act is implemented, I think same thing will continue. My reading is that in this country, the dictatorship is on the way. Yes, 2024 is going to be a very important case, the election that is going to take place. The government is almost moving towards one-party system, unwritten one-party system. Now, the thing is, whether you write in the constitution or you don't write in the constitution, if one person runs the whole country, one person who is not even a railway minister goes and inaugurates the railway platform, who is not a civil aviation minister goes and inaugurates the airport, the person has captured the power, and the person is so hungry for the power. I'm not naming the person, you can all guess who I'm talking about. And this act will only add to the power of this person or these kind of persons. Whosoever comes in 24, we do not know yet, but this law will certainly help the person who heads the government or who is going to head the government. And therefore, the power will be centralized in one person's hand, and in center, and in states also, the person who heads the state government will also misutilize this law. So this is the freedom is going to be compromised. This is the biggest danger in this country.
Just one short comment on what
I
Arvind has
have
said. Just one short comment.
Go ahead, Dr. Swamy.
All this information will go only to the Prime Minister. It will not go to the Home Minister. It will not go to the Foreign Minister. It will not go to the senior ministers who are in the warrant of precedence, number one, number two, number three. You see, it will be the Prime Minister, and he will be the only person who will get to see all this. And if he appoints his own people, he'll protect them. So there has to be some
Mechanism.
counter somewhere to counter here.
Yes.
no. I
Yeah,
have
Jagdish.
some comments to make. Yeah, I have some comments to make. Many people today on our show, that is the panel, are those people who, by ideology and by their action, have fought the emergency and all these various laws. I think Venkat also will agree, because indirectly, directly, Dr. Swamy, he and many others who are on the panel were against the emergency. Mr.
Yeah.
Narendra Modi also claimed that he worked in the emergency, and I am aware that he spoke against the telephone tapping, he spoke against dictatorship. He came to the railway, Maninagar railway station, to keep a watch on Dr. Swamy and see that his luggage was carried forward and all that. So, what I want to say is, there are parties in power, there are opposition parties, but when we talk about democracy, we must rise above all this. So, the Janta culture or the Janta parties, I would say the Janta parivars, came out of the struggle against the emergency. So, these
Yes.
parties at least owe their existence to this second freedom struggle against Indira Gandhi's dictatorship. If we coming to power and using the same weapon doesn't make us then any different. So this is as a comment I want to make. Another thing, Arvind was very much worried that one party rule and dictatorship, one person ruling. We heard all these stories during the emergency. We were told इंदिरा गांधी के बाद में संजय गांधी के बाद में उसका कुत्ता ये देश पे राज करेगा. But I think we must have some faith in the Lord Rama's, whose grand temple after 500 years we are going to be putting up in Ayodhya, to the struggle of that 500-year-old struggle. So don't take the Indian people so lightly. And as Dr. Swamy always has been saying, the illiterate masses of North India wiped out the Gandhi dynasty. Perhaps Indira Gandhi declared the elections on the 18th of January 1977 with the hope that she will bring this controlled democracy or controlled dictatorship, but she was wiped out. People of India are quite intelligent. My main question now to Dr. Venkat Iyer is, which are the democratic countries or large democracies like UK, USA, and other parts of the world? Does such similar law exist anywhere else in progressive and large democracies? This is my question to Dr. Venkat Iyer.
Yeah, this is an important question.
Sorry.
I said this is an important question. Is there any parallel democratic country?
The crucial word there is democratic countries, and actually I would say free countries. So definitely not of that sweeping nature. You know, there are other aspects of this law which can also be criticized, which I have not done. For example, why should, in a free country, people be required to go through a huge bureaucratic procedure to obtain a SIM card? Now, to my mind, this is not as trivial as it might seem, because the answer given typically by a bureaucrat or a politician is, oh, if we allowed people to obtain SIM cards without verification, then terrorists will buy SIM cards in large numbers. Do you think realistically that terrorists actually go and go through these official procedures when they want to get something? So at the same time, what you're doing is you're of course causing a huge amount of inconvenience to ordinary law-abiding decent people. So I also read somewhere, I haven't been able to verify this, that there is a penalty under this law which says if a person buys more than 9 SIM cards using a particular form of identification, then they are committing an offense. Now, these are all completely stupid laws, quite apart from draconian. Now, therefore, Jagdish, your question is very apposite, and all I would say is the short answer is no. Democratic countries do not have laws of this amplitude. Having said that, I do go back to what I said at the beginning of my talk, and that is that you cannot therefore say there should be no law. That would be going to the other extreme, which would be totally unacceptable, because clearly there is a justification for some of the measures that are contemplated under this law, except that there have to be safeguards. The real difficulty with this law is not so much the power, but the safeguards are lacking. And to make it worse, you have very weak institutions. For example, the judiciary, which, if the judiciary was strong, quite frankly, I wouldn't mind a weak law, because judges can rectify some of the defects in the law up to a point. Obviously, there are limits. But if you have a combination of all this, plus corruption, mismanagement, a total collapse of ethical values, then I think you're definitely in deep trouble.
Well, just to add
Venkat,
to your point,
before you conclude,
yeah, go ahead. I mean, I had a point.
Venkat, Doctor.
Yeah, go on. You speak.
Dr. Swamy, you can finish. No. Okay. You finish your question, then I'll put up this question for Venkat.
See, some of the people watching this show have correctly pointed out that if you are really after big crooks, they are not going to use these telephones. They will use satellite phones, which is totally out of your control. So, I mean, they have to be serious. This is ultimately going to only affect the middle class and nobody else.
Yeah.
And from whom the blackmail can result very easily, because you're creating a situation where officials become very important. They can come and say, that we are going to put you in jail, and people get frightened. What you're going to do is make people clamp up on speaking frankly.
Yeah. Which points actually to the need again for even-handed enforcement, and also technically competent people to deal with these things. But of course, the other problem there is political interference. Even if you had an honest officer in the intelligence services who would apply his mind and try to nab the serious criminals, there's a fair chance that he'll be thwarted by corrupt politicians.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jagdish.
Yeah, Venkat, some cynical, just see the question on the screen, and people are trying to justify the act, saying what is displayed. But please tell the viewers the consequences of Watergate.
Yeah, actually, I guess Ramesh should be in a better position to.
No, because our viewers may want to know the consequences.
Yeah.
I think.
Can I read it out for you?
The issue is very simple. Where any person in power has this kind of an authority that they just warrantless wiretap on people, and I think this particular law gives them that power today. And they've given it not only at the state level, at central level, they've given it to the central level, the state, and any person that they deem fit, that's what I am really worried about, because you really don't know down at a secretary level or even at an undersecretary level, or anybody can just jump in and do something and say, hey, the minister has already given me the power or something. So they might even have a blanket one and they can keep going at people. So I think it is a very, very, very slippery slope. This law, as you said, almost no safeguards, I think that's exactly what I think Dr. Swamy is. I'm obviously Dr. Swamy or anybody else for that matter with the same mind is going to challenge this in the court of law, because this has to be challenged. This has to be tested in the courts, and I think the Supreme Court needs to take cognizance of this absolute lack of any safeguards and any oversight in giving such powers for the government to take control. And not only just wiretap, Venkat, they have also provisions that they can just take over entire telephone networks and do whatever they choose necessary. That is
on very vague grounds.
Very vague grounds is extremely, I mean, it's very extreme, because you can just shut down things, and basically they're justifying the internet shutdowns where it happened in Manipur for 6 months, 8 months, I mean, months together. Those things are absolutely wrong in a democratic setting. Now, I'm not saying in China or Russia, North Korea, forget it, go at it. But in a democratic setup like India, in a long term, it is very, very scary. And people, I mean, the Andhbucks and Nandbucks have no brains. They think as long as there is a Hindutva government, I don't care. It's kind of a stupid thing to say, because you guys have no idea how democracy works. You just sit inside and just you just don't have any clue how this democracy works. And technology per se, they're just sitting and writing stuff on stuff without they have no authority. Tomorrow the government can just shut them down.
Incidentally, Ravan's government was also a Hindutva government, just for your information.
True. And the Brahmin government too. Anyway. So, Venkat, the key issue here, as far as which is, I think, it's pretty obvious for the judiciary, and even from Dr. Swamy. I'm an illiterate in law, but at least I understand the implications of such laws from a technology standpoint. Because if you give me these powers as a technical guy, as a guy who knows security, I can run havoc in the country. Literally, if I'm one of the undersecretaries, even a lower level secretary in a government, all I need is just my highly educated minister who's not even passed a third class. You just write a document, he's going to sign it. You have the authority to do anything, which is stupidity with no oversight. I can just run roost. I can just tap anybody's phone at whim. Let him go to courts and say, okay, they tapped. Let's see, 20 years later, we will decide what the court does. Whether I'm alive or he's alive is a different issue. The fundamental aspect is it's not more than as Dr. and you said that violation of privacy. It is violation of fundamental rights per se, saying that you have no idea as to why you are being tapped. There is no reason. You are being a normal taxpaying citizen. It doesn't stop the government from spying on you. It needs to understand, saying, okay, like as I said, there needs to be a FISA code. There needs to be somebody who says, okay, fine, your wiretap is reasonable enough. You have given me enough reasons to go ahead. Okay, go ahead. In heights of 9/11, when FBI, CIA, and all the three-letter agencies in America were running after people, tapping phones, in spite of that, it still happened in America. I'm just saying it didn't happen. In spite of all of this nonsense happened, even today, it continues to do so. But at least there was a mechanism in place to put these law enforcement agencies, because you give law enforcement, you give power to people and you give more power to them, they'll abuse it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Because I work in the law enforcement industry, I work in electronic surveillance, on these industries. I know what unbridled power can do.
Absolutely.
I think
anything else we can conclude.
No, I would like to say that recently, the foreign minister has gone to Moscow and made peace with him, because earlier on we cancelled his 2 visits to India. We cancelled many other agreements that were to be there in view of the fact that we thought that the Americans would be buddy-buddy with Modi, but it's not turned out to be so. So now the dangerous part is that foreign affairs, the Chinese have occupied 4,600 square kilometers of land in India, and nobody is talking about it. And so I think what we are doing is creating the climate by which Mr. Modi can make India into, even Putin has elections, by the way. So elections is not an indication of democracy per se. And so do the Chinese have at the local level. And so we may end up with a dictatorship, and we will all be responsible for having not raised our voice at that time.
Right. Can't get a Surya Namaskaram. As we said in Tamil. You go do Surya Namaskar after you go blind.
Yes, Venkat, you want to say anything before we close up?
Arvind,
No, nothing at all. Well, actually, the only thing I would say is I hope that your legal challenge goes forward and that you have some success. That's at the moment the only hope, because this bill is now done and dusted by Parliament. It has been signed into law. And so, if you're lucky, you get conscientious judges who would at least track down 2 or 3 crucial provisions in the law which are so blatant in terms of their defiance of fundamental rights and the rule of law. But as always, being as cynical as I am, I would be a little cautious about coming to a conclusion that the judiciary is definitely going to strike this law down. You had a number of recent judgments which tell you what is the flavor of the month. So anyway, good luck, and I'll keep watching with great interest.
Dr. Swamy,
Well, I think you could give us you can give us some 5-6 points out of the reading of the act and tell us that these are the ones which also you, if you're not already doing it, should be included in the challenge.
Absolutely, more than happy to. But it could be a person chalice, because if it comes to the attention of some of the judges sitting today in the Supreme Court that I had a hand in your petition, you can be sure that that would be a good reason for them to give you short shrift.
Don't worry about that. I have
one anecdote.
enough status in the courts to see that nobody think that Venkat can swing bowl a googly to me.
No.
Dr. Swamy, one interesting anecdote. When a telecom bill was brought by Rajiv Gandhi, the then presidents, Zail Singh and Venkatraman, junked it. They did not sign the bill. I hope this president had the time to review and say, okay, this doesn't look good, but I guess, she just blindly signed it. Very sad. Very sad.
Yeah. She was chosen for that.
Yeah. It's very sad that this bill is passed without any due process. That's shameful.
Yeah.
Arvindji, please conclude.
Yeah, I think very timely this discussion was organized by VHS on this platform, because this is an act which is going to challenge the freedom of individual in this country and bring in some kind of undeclared emergency. We have been opposing emergency. Even the people in power today, they were the claimants that they also opposed emergency, as Jagdish mentioned in his small remark. But whatever was being opposed 40 years ago is now being done by the same people. So this is a challenge to individual freedom and the liberty. And I'm sure what Dr. Swamy is going to do is something similar to what he did in 1975. He challenged the dictatorship of Indira Gandhi. And though we cannot officially say that BJP government under Modi is a dictatorship government, but it is heading towards that. And if this act is implemented and if it is not challenged, it should not go unchallenged. And therefore, it is important for people like Dr. Swamy to oppose it and challenge it in the court. We hope that 2024, in few hours' time, 2023 is going to go, and the first sun of 2024 will emerge. We hope this 2024 will also bring hope and liberty to the people, and some good sense will prevail on people who are implementing this kind of anti-people policies. We'll be meeting again next Sunday, but before that, we must thank Dr. Venkat Iyer. He has been part of VHS programs earlier also, and it was wonderful. I missed in the beginning because of some technical reason I could not join, but it was wonderful. Whatever description you have given of this act, and the dangers that you have mentioned. These dangers should be taken serious note of by each individual. Thank you, Dr. Swamy, and thanks for informing that you are going to challenge this act in the Supreme Court, and we hope we pray for the success of your case against the government. Thanks, Jagdish. Thanks, Ramesh Swamy. I thank the technical team again. Since we are completing 220 episodes today, and now we will be meeting only in 2024, a big thanks for the technical team led by Ashish Shetty, Gadgi Rakesh, Ishwar Iyer, Swaminathan, Tejas Navalgul, Vishal Mehta, Najesh Nair. This team has done wonders, and our program has reached far and wide because of the expertise of this team. Thank you all. We will be meeting again next Sunday in New Year with a new program and new hope. Thank you very much. Till then, Namaskar, Jai Hind.